Hello, my name is Margaret Goldman. I'm a member of the Grand Traverse Area League of Women Voters. Thank you for tuning into this presentation called Know What You Sign. Today's presentation will focus on the potential ballot proposals that could go before voters in 2026. This presentation is educational about what petitions are being circulated for 2026 and the proposal that is already on the 2026 ballot. It does not advocate signing or not signing a petition. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the League. The League of Women Voters was officially founded in Chicago in 1920, just 6 months before the 19th Amendment was ratified and women gained the right to vote. Formed by the suffragettes of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, the League began as a mighty political experiment designed to help 20 million women carry out their new responsibilities as voters. The League's mission then and now is empowering voters and defending democracy. We envision a pluralistic, multiracial democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate in their government. We believe in the power of women to create a more perfect democracy. The League has a proud reputation of being nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, but always working on vital issues of concern to our members and the public. In Michigan, we are fortunate to have a constitution that gives 3 powers to its citizens that not all states provide. The first power is called legislative initiative, and it gives voters the right, if certain conditions are met, to initiate legislation or laws. The second power is to invoke a referendum, which means they could repeal laws passed by the legislature. The third power is the power to amend the Michigan Constitution. Nothing in our Constitution may be altered without the approval of voters. Any action by the legislator to amend the Constitution must be placed on the ballot. In Michigan, the number of signatures required to put something on as a constitutional amendment or as an initiative or a referendum differs depending on what the petition is. Signatures on a petition for a constitutional amendment or initiated legislation are not counted if they were collected more than 180 days before the petition is filed with the Secretary of State. This 180-day window limits the amount of time campaigners have to gather valid signatures. The Board of Canvassers decides on the language of each petition, but not on the merit of those petitions. The initiative to hold a state constitutional convention automatically appears on the state's ballot every 16 years. The question that you will see reads, shall a convention of elected delegates be convened in 2027 to draft a general revision of the state constitution for presentation to the state's voters for their approval or rejection? When Michigan holds a constitutional convention, every item in the Constitution is up for grabs and could be changed. Michigan has held 4 constitutional conventions since its start in 1835. The most recent one was in 1961, which is when the Constitution said that this question would appear every 16 years on the ballot. There are no signatures required for this proposal. The first three things I will talk about are basically pertaining to the same subject. Two of them, the first two, are put out by the same organization. The first one, called American Citizens for Voting, we will require documentary proof of citizenship for newly registered voters. This is the 100-word summary for petition number 1. It would require the Secretary of State to verify citizenship of all registered voters. It would document citizenship, remove non-citizens using governmental records, and track separate eligibility requirements for federal and state or local elections. It would prohibit counting ballots from voters with unverified citizenship unless voters show documents to the Secretary within 6 days after the election. For new registrations, it would require proof of citizenship by showing birth certificate, passport, and/or other documents. It would eliminate the affidavit alternative for voters without a photo ID. It would require photo ID or driver's license or partial Social Security number to vote absentee. It would require a state-funded hardship program for obtaining required documents, and would subject violations to a $1,000 fine and/or up to 5 years in imprisonment. One of the questions that often comes up in this petition is, are there laws in place already that require citizenship to vote? And the answer to that is yes. It is already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal and state elections. Ineligible people, including non-citizens that seek to register to vote, could face fines, imprisonment, and the possibility of deportation. Direct proof of citizenship adds extra hurdles for eligible citizens without solving a real problem. Another question is, do we have a history of non-citizens voting since it's illegal? Following a 2025 review of voter rolls, Michigan found that non-citizens accounted for approximately 0.00028% of all ballots cast in the 2024 general election. This amounted to 15 confirmed or suspected cases of non-citizen voting out of 5.7 million votes. The second petition put out by Americans for Citizen Voting number 2 is very similar. It is pretty certain that the sponsor will circulate petitions for this version. It is unlikely that they will circulate petitions for the last one. This proposed constitutional amendment will require documentary proof of citizenship for new voter registrations, as well as for those voters updating their registration. Here's the wording for the 100-word summary. This constitutional amendment would require citizenship verification for all voters, which is birth certificate, passport, and/or other documents. When they list and/or other documents, they mean if your name on your birth certificate is not the same as you are presently using, you would have to document why your name is changed by whatever documents they would ask for. It would remove non-citizens after notice and a 45-day rebuttal. Beginning November 2nd, 2027, it would prohibit counting ballots for voters with unverified citizenship unless documents would be shown to an election administrator within 6 days after the election. It would also eliminate the affidavit alternative for voters who did not have their photo ID. It would require photo ID or partial social security number to vote absentee. It would subject violators to fine and or imprison. Either of these two petitions need 446,198 signatures by July 6th of 2026. A frequently asked question after this one is, why is there concern about providing documentary proof of citizenship? And the answer to that is there is a concern about the cost and availability of these documents, especially for married women, low-income individuals, naturalized citizens, minorities and people of color, elderly citizens, and people living in rural areas. What types of documents count? Although some proposals don't specify the documents, the common types of ID include U.S. birth certificates, U.S. passports, and certificates of naturalization. Other common IDs, like a driver's license, typically are not accepted unless they show specifically proof of citizenship or indicate the place of birth. Another question is, will the new requirement to provide a Social Security or a driver's license be required at every election or just for the registration of absentee ballot? And the answer to that is uncertain. The next petition you may come across is called Protect Voters' Rights. This is put out by a different organization than the previous two slides, but it also requires documentary proof of citizenship for new and currently registered voters. This is the 100-word summary. It would require the Secretary of State to verify citizenship of all registered voters, document citizenship, remove non-citizens using governmental records, and track separate eligibility requirements for federal and state and local elections. It would prohibit counting ballots from voters with unverified citizenship unless voters show documents to the Secretary within 6 days after the election. For new registrations, it would require proof of citizenship by showing birth certificate, passport, and/or other documents. It would eliminate the affidavit alternative for voters without a photo ID. It would require photo ID or driver's license or partial Social Security number to vote absentee. It would require state-funded hardship program for obtaining the required documents, subject violations to $1,000 fine and/or up to 5 years imprisonment. This one also needs 446,198 signatures. All three of these proposals would require documentation, photo ID, driver's license, birth certificate, U.S. passport, and/or other documents. Many of these documents are costly and could be difficult to obtain for some voters. The cost to get a passport these days is $130 for a book and $165 for a book plus a card. The cost of a birth certificate varies by county, but averages around $15. In addition to the cost, the issue is the time it could take to process the U.S. passport, which is 4 to 6 weeks, and to obtain birth certificate or other documents depending on location. The next petition you might come across is called Rank My Vote. The 100-word summary of this petition includes, it would require ranked choice voting for federal offices, for lieutenant and governor and lieutenant governor, attorney general, and secretary of state, allowing voters to numerically rank candidates by voter preference starting in 2029. It would count votes in rounds, eliminating the lowest ranked candidate and reallocating their votes to the remaining ranked candidates until the candidate with the most final round votes is declared the winner. It would allow voters to rank at least 4 more candidates than positions to be nominated or elected, unless insufficient number of candidates. It would authorize local jurisdictions to adopt the use of ranked choice voting in local elections, move the August primary to June or earlier in even year elections. It would require legislative funding and implementing legislation. This sounds very confusing, and there is a simpler explanation, which I will read here. First, everyone's first choice votes are counted in the first round. If no candidate gets more than 50%, then they go to a second round. If no one has a majority that first round, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated. People who voted for that eliminated candidate have their votes go to the next choice. This process repeats until someone has over 50% and wins. Ranked choice voting is designed so that the winner has broad support and that voters don't feel like they are wasting their vote on someone who might not win. The next slide, or the next petition, is called Axe My Tax. And the summary of this is, this would prohibit real and personal property taxes. Currently, the primary funding source for counties, municipalities, schools, community colleges, parks, and voter-approved bond repayment. It would increase a portion of the state sales tax redirected to cities, townships, and villages from 10% to 13.3%, and from 0% to 6.67% for counties. It would shift 10% of state income, marijuana, alcohol, and tobacco tax revenue to local governments, allow the use of this revenue only for listed essential government and infrastructure services, but not for schools, community colleges, parks, or local government services. It would require 60% voter approval for local tax increases, require 2/3 vote of the legislature for tax increases greater than 0.1% over 5 years. The question that comes up, if people are still confused, does this mean all property taxes would be eliminated? Yes, it does. The next petition is called Voters to Stop Pay Cuts. And this one is probably the most complex of all of the petitions. If you still don't understand it, I encourage you to read about it online. I will give you some sources later. If this is passed, it would decrease the minimum wage from $13.73 to $13.29 in 2026, and from $15 to $14.16 in 2027, with an annual inflation-based increase thereafter. It would increase tipped worker wage to 48% of the full minimum wage in 2025, 60% in 2026, 70% in 2027, 80% in 2028, 90% in 2029, and 100% in 2030. It would eliminate civil fines for employers failing to pay the minimum hourly wage. If enough valid signatures are collected, this would repeal Public Act 1, 2025. A clarification, this is a referendum. It would repeal this act that has been passed by the Congress. As I said, this is a very confusing one, and it's because it is a compromise It has a long history and it's interesting reading if you want to go and do it. The next one is Invest in My Kids, or Invest in Michigan Kids. Beginning in 2027, this would impose an additional 5% tax on annual taxable income over $1 million for joint filers and $500,000 for single filers. This tax would be in addition to existing state income taxes, and it would be deposited into the school aid fund. It would require that the money from this tax be used exclusively on local school district classrooms, career and technical education, reducing class sizes, and retaining teachers. It would prohibit the use of this money for other purposes, with spending subject to annual audits. The next one is Michiganders for Money Out of Politics. This petition would prohibit regulated electric and gas utilities, contractors with over $250,000 annually in government contracts, and people and organizations with substantial connections to these utilities and contractors from making direct or indirect campaign contributions to those who run for or hold offices that impact them. It would expand campaign finance laws and restrictions that regulate spending on political communications, including laws that require disclosing donor information to apply to communications clearly identifying candidates and/or ballot questions, even if they do not expressly advocate voting for or against them. It would expressly apply the law requiring disclosure of who paid for political communications to all internet political communications. This, a commonly asked question after this one is, does this apply to all level of candidates or just the Michigan state and local offices? And it only applies to Michigan state and local offices. There are certain requirements on each of the petition sheets that you might be asked to sign, including in 8-point type, the name and address of the person, group, or organization paying for the printing of the petition form, preceded by the words paid for with regulated funds by. There are no exceptions. It is also important for the audience to understand that the Board of Canvassers approves the 100-word summary if submitted. The Board of State Canvassers does not approve the merit of the petitions. And what will you see on your petition? The 100-word summary will be on the front of the petition, and it should include the following information: a summary of the proposal in 100 words or fewer in 12-point type, the full text of the proposed amendment or law in 8-point type following the summary. If the proposal alters an existing part of the state constitution, the petition must specifically state the provisions that would be changed or eliminated. Before you as a voter put your signature on a petition, you should take the time to fully read, understand, and verify what it is asking for, what the potential consequences are, and who is behind it, so that you are making an informed decision. This is essentially a reminder to be informed and cautious so that you don't accidentally support something you may disagree with or that has hidden implications. There are many trusted resources that can help you understand these sometimes confusing petitions and the voting process. The Michigan Board of State Canvassers, there is the web address for them there. Vote 411, Vote 411 for candidate and voting information. Vote 411 is put out by the Michigan League of Michigan, the Michigan League of Women Voters. MichiganVoting.org for election voting and registration requirements. The Michigan Department of State for election and petition information. This is an invitation for everyone to join the League of Women Voters. It is open to all members, not just women who are 16 years and older. Joining automatically confers membership at the local, state, and national levels. Membership provides the opportunity to be actively involved in local, state, and national issues. And you can go to the League of Women Voters, Michigan.org, and select the Joint Renew option. We recognize this was a lot of information to take in. There are some questions that have been asked after other presentations like this, and I would like to address those now.
I have a question. What happens to an initiative if it passes?
If the initiative passes, it is sent to the legislature, which must have to deal with it. It is sent to the appropriate arm of the government, and then they will put it into legislative language. Once that is done, the legislature does have to pass it by a simple majority vote.
Another question is, will the language be the same on the ballot as on the petition if they get the required signatures?
The 100-word summary will be on the ballot. The reverse side of the petition should contain the full description of the petition.
Another question is, will the League of Women Voters of Michigan have positions on any of the proposals?
Yes, indeed, we do have positions, but this is an educational presentation, and so this is not the place for me to talk about those. You can see what positions we have on the ones we have positions on our website. It is also likely that once it is settled what is on the ballot, we will be putting out other educational programs to explain our positions on these things.
I've seen people out circulating the petitions. Are all the petitions using paid circulators?
Actually, most of them use paid circulators. There have been ballot proposals in the past that were entirely collected by volunteers, but in this election, most of them are using paid collectors. That being the end of the questions, I would like to thank you for tuning in to this presentation and hope it wasn't too confusing. Thank you very much.